Evelyn was 51. She and her husband Richard had shared nearly 3 decades together. Looking back, it was almost impossible to believe there had once been genuine passion between them. Now in their modest flat in the quiet market town of Ashford, only habit, silence, and the occasional word exchanged over dinner remained. Their 2 sons, Oliver and Henry, had grown and moved away, one to Bristol, the other to Edinburgh, pursuing their own lives far from home. Evelyn and Richard were left alone, yet she often felt like a bird trapped inside a glass box, visible but unreachable, surrounded by silence and space. 6 months earlier, they had moved into a newly built apartment on Red Star Street, closer to the town center. The flat was spacious and bright, but it felt too empty, too much air, too few sounds. Richard was still swallowed by work, leaving early and returning late. Sometimes it seemed he'd become part of the sofa and the TV remote, mute and immobile, rarely glancing at her with anything resembling desire. Even in summer, when Evelyn wore her favorite light beige dress, a delicate sheath with a modest bateau neckline and a thin belt cinching her waist, he didn't notice. Not a word, not a look. By spring, Evelyn realized she could not go on like this. She needed to shake her body awake to remind herself she was still alive. Not far from their flat, a new gym had opened. Modern, clean, with floor-to-ceiling windows and walls of mirrors. On a Monday morning, feeling slightly shy, after all, she was no spring chicken, Evelyn went in wearing simple gray tracksuit trousers and a soft cotton top. To her surprise, the gym wasn't filled with young fitness fanatics but with women like her, 40-plus, well cared for, strong, with eyes still shimmering with the hunger to feel alive. 2 weeks passed. She found herself drawn into the rhythm. Treadmill, a little yoga, shower, then home again. But one day, a man sat down on a nearby machine. He nodded politely and looked her in the eye. "You live in flat 24, don't you?" "I'm George. I live right across the hall, 25. "Looks like we're neighbors." She froze. His voice was warm, gentle. George was 56 but fit and confident, dressed in a sleek black t-shirt and light gray joggers. His hair was thick with streaks of silver, his hands strong. His smile was easy, human. A man who knew how to listen. From that day, their meetings at the gym grew more frequent. Sometimes they crossed paths at the lockers, sometimes they warmed up side by side. George was an interior designer working from home. He mentioned his wife lived elsewhere temporarily on a contract. Evelyn didn't ask for details. 3 weeks later, he suggested, "If you're up for it after training, there's a little cafe around the corner. Great latte. You should try it." For some reason she couldn't say no. They met in the cafe on a Thursday. George waited by the window. Evelyn wore a soft cream dress with a slim belt and sensible low heels. Almost like a date, but without confessions. "I haven't had coffee with a man in over 10 years. She smiled wryly. "Funny," George replied. "I haven't met a woman I could just talk to without trying to impress." They talked for nearly 2 hours. Conversation flowed easily. He looked into her eyes, listened, laughed quietly. When they parted, he said, "Evelyn, you're refreshingly real." That's rare these days. Walking home, her cheeks flushed. It wasn't love. It was something different. Like being seen again as a woman. A week later, George invited her for tea. She agreed. Then again. And again, they became something like friends, though their connection felt fragile, like fine china with hairline cracks, still usable but easily broken. One evening, George asked, "What's the hardest part about your marriage?" She paused. "The way he stopped looking at me. Like I don't exist." George sighed. "I think we all want to be noticed, even if we don't say it." That night, Evelyn stared at herself in the mirror, earrings off. The woman looking back wasn't old or tired or broken. She was simply waiting for someone to awaken her. After that spring, things began to shift slowly. She still woke at 7, made Richard's porridge, ironed his shirts. But inside, something had moved. She started wearing perfume again. The bottle gathering dust on her dresser. She wore her amber earrings from the English coast, little treasures from a trip years ago. George never made a single inappropriate move, yet his gaze, his voice, his charm wrapped around her loneliness like delicate silk. Early June arrived, and George proposed, "If the weather's good, maybe an evening walk along the river? The town's beautiful in summer." Evelyn hesitated. Evening, a walk with a man who wasn't her husband, that wasn't just coffee anymore. It was stepping over a line. But she said, "Let's." She dressed simply in a light gray linen shirt dress, cinched with a thin belt, and comfortable sneakers. Her hair was softly curled. lips shimmering with clear gloss. Minimalist, effortless, feminine. They walked along the riverbank in nearby Canterbury. He showed her the newly restored park. They strolled silently, then laughed, then shared ice cream by the fountain. For a moment she felt 25 again. George spoke of youth, failed projects, and how life after 50 often fell into too much quiet. Sometimes, he said, gazing at the water, we live not how we want but how we're used to. What about you? Do you want more? His eyes held hers, the kind of look she hadn't seen in years. That I want someone close. Someone who feels. Who's not afraid to be alive. Her chest tightened. They walked on, silent, until they reached a bench by the river. He sat, she beside him. Then he took her hand, gently, as if asking permission. She didn't pull away. You know I miss human warmth. Even just touch. Me too, she whispered. He didn't kiss her, but his hand stayed near hers, and that was enough to change the evening. The next morning, anxiety gnawed at her. Had she gone too far? Richard said, I'll be late. Meeting with partners. Don't wait up. She nodded and stirred her tea. They didn't look at each other. George messaged, thanks for last night. I haven't felt so alive in a long time. If you don't mind, I'd like to see you again. She didn't know what to say. Saturday morning, they bumped into each other at the gym. George smiled but said nothing. After training, Evelyn threw a beige sweater over her tracksuit and stepped into the lobby. George was waiting. Fancy a refreshing drink? He offered, holding out a cold lemonade. I thought we'd pretend nothing happened. She whispered as he leaned closer. I'm no good at pretending. But if you want, I'll disappear. No, she said too quickly. Don't. They sat on a bench in the park. The breeze tugged at her sweater. She felt him glance at her collarbone, wrists, hair. Deliberately, she adjusted her hair clip, touched her neck. A dangerous game. But she didn't want to stop playing. Suddenly George said, if you were free, I'd take you to a little town called Whitby. Beautiful place. We'd walk, eat pastries, sit by the water. She smiled. I'd wear my daisy dress and hoop earrings. He reached out, touching the edge of her earring. You'd look perfect. In that moment, Evelyn knew she wasn't pretending. She was alive. July was hot. Even nights were stuffy, windows wide open. But their flat still felt like an aquarium. Richard came home late, tired, silent. Part of the furniture. No fights, just absence. With George it was different. After each coffee or stroll, she returned home not just smiling, but feeling like a veil had been lifted. She remembered what it was to feel wanted, interesting. George never crossed a line, but his looks and gestures were intimate, attentive. One day, she found herself choosing lingerie with thoughts of how it would look beneath her blouse if he ever brushed her back. George suggested, let's do something different. A day with no rules. A drive somewhere. Where? She asked. There's a quiet lakeside retreat near the New Forest. Almost empty. We could just walk. Her heart clenched. A day away from the city. She knew where this could lead, but she was tired of fear. They left early in his silver Renault. She wore a creamy slip dress with thin straps and a denim jacket. Her hair in a low ponytail, lips glossed neutral. He played a 90s playlist, The Cranberries mixed with Oasis. They laughed. The place was as promised. Calm lake, green trees, warm sun, few people. They walked beside the water, then sat on a wooden jetty. She slipped off her sandals and dipped her feet in. He said softly, Evelyn, when was the last time you let yourself just be? I'm not sure I remember, she admitted. I remember. He took her hand gently, tracing the lines on her wrist. A chill ran through her, skin awakening. Your hands are beautiful. So alive. She looked away, whispering, you're dangerous. Why? Because you make me want to forget everything I thought was right. They sat in silence, the wind rustling leaves, their breaths mingling. Back in the car, he asked, do you want me to stop touching you? She met his gaze. Seriously? No. I want you to keep going. He pulled onto a quiet forest road. Stopped under the shadows. No houses, no people. Just birdsong. He leaned toward her. Slowly she didn't pull back. His lips were soft, warm, smelling of mint gum. His hand slid down her shoulder, slipping the strap of her dress. She shivered. Not from cold but from memories. No one had touched her like this in years. His palms explored with patience, through thin fabric, through trembles, through breath. They didn't rush. It felt like coming home, to herself. Not a wife, mother, or housekeeper, but a woman. Back home, she stared out the window, silent, not awkward, but wanting to hold that feeling inside. Don't you regret it? He asked, not looking. Not for a second that evening she slipped quietly inside. Evelyn's mornings had changed. She still rose early, brewed tea, and prepared Richard's breakfast, but beneath the surface, a quiet revolution was underway. The stale routine was punctuated by small acts of rebellion, the delicate spritz of her favorite jasmine perfume, the amber earrings that caught the light as she moved, the way she carried herself with a newfound grace that wasn't lost on those around her. Even if Richard pretended not to notice that he said nothing, of course. His silence was like a wall she paced endlessly, wondering if it was indifference or confusion that kept him mute. One evening, over a dinner of roast chicken and new potatoes, Richard broke the silence. "Is there someone?" His voice was calm but carried a weight that unsettled her. She froze, her fork idly poking at the food on her plate. "Why do you say that? There's something different about you. In your eyes. It's not just tiredness anymore." Evelyn's mind raced. Should she lie? Should she confess? Neither felt right. "I'm just feeling alive again," she whispered. Richard shrugged, a gesture heavy with resignation. "It's strange. But maybe you deserve that." The conversation drifted, unresolved, like fog over the river. Despite this tension, Evelyn's secret meetings with George continued, though more cautiously. They no longer met in the bustling gym or the cozy cafe but in quiet corners beyond Ashford. At a friend's countryside cottage, in a small wooden cabin smelling of raspberries and fresh pine, there, Evelyn shed her roles and worries. She wore soft cotton dresses buttoned at the front, sleeves rolled up, bare feet brushing the cool wooden floor. George called her Sunshine, a nickname that made her smile despite the ache in her chest. One afternoon, seated at the kitchen table in his oversized shirt, George whispered, "You're not just beautiful, Evelyn. You're like a song that plays inside me, even when you're silent." She laughed through tears, a mixture of tenderness and pain, knowing this fragile moment was borrowed time. Summer, like all things, would end on the town's anniversary day. Richard insisted they go into Ashford together. "We should at least pretend," he said, a faint trace of the man she once loved flickering in his voice. Evelyn chose a mint green dress, modest yet tailored to hint at the slim waist beneath. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she wore delicate drop earrings shaped like teardrops. George was there too, hosting a design exhibition at the town library. Their eyes locked across the crowded square, a silent storm passing between them. George didn't approach. Richard held Evelyn's hand tightly, but inside, she felt a fracture growing. The man beside her was a stranger. The man watching her from afar was the one who stirred her heart. That night, with Richard in the shower, Evelyn opened the window and let the cool night air wash over her. Her phone buzzed, a message from George. "You were especially beautiful today. I wanted to come over but couldn't." Her fingers trembled as she typed back, "Me too. I can't stop waiting." His reply was brief, "I know. See you tomorrow." The next morning, Evelyn packed a small bag. A cream blouse, a notebook filled with scribbled poems and memories, a faded photo of herself at 24 standing in a wheat field, golden-haired and free. She kissed Richard on the cheek. "I'm visiting Tanya for a couple of days. You remember her from Kent?" He grunted, "Sure. Say no questions." No suspicion. She slipped out quietly, the door clicking softly behind her. "I in the taxi." She studied her hands in the dim light. They were beautiful, alive. Only now did she truly see them. To George's country retreat. The air smelled of apples and rosemary. He greeted her barefoot, wearing a pale gray shirt casually unbuttoned. They said nothing. He pulled her close, heartbeat syncing with hers. Clothes fell away like old fears shedding skin. His hands traced her shoulders, neck, and waist as if discovering treasures. She trembled. Not from passion, but from tenderness. They rested on an aged sofa beneath floral curtains. His hand slid beneath her dress, warm and steady. "If I were someone else," he began softly. "Don't," she interrupted, "we're here. Now. That's enough." That night, Evelyn wrote in her notebook, "When a man holds you like his silence lives inside you, you want to cry from happiness." Autumn came harshly, with winds whipping leaves into spirals and the first cold breaths of winter. Evelyn lived between two worlds. The flat in Ashford smelling of roast and routine, and the cabin with George alive with touch, laughter and stolen glances, but reality intruded. Early October, Richard found her notebook, the one where she poured out poems, thoughts, fragments of dreams. He was silent for 3 days. Then one evening while she washed dishes, he said quietly, "How long has it been with him?" She dropped a cup. It clinked against the sink but didn't shatter. Life was still merciful in small ways. Sorry, Richard said, sitting stiffly at the table, back taut, hands clenched. Who is he? The neighbor? George? He snorted. So you needed someone else to remind you you're alive. She wanted to scream. I needed you. Instead she sat, voice barely a whisper. I needed myself. I was disappearing here, turning into a ghost. Richard stood, retreated to the bedroom, closing the door softly like a church's hush. That night, there was no conversation. Morning came with the usual routine, Richard leaving silently for work, Evelyn watching his retreating back. A week later, George confronted her gently. Evelyn, you have to choose. I'm not asking for forever, but I can't live this double life. She stood on his porch, wearing a deep burgundy coat and long suede gloves, autumn leaves painting the trees with parting colors. I can't keep lying. I need to know if this is us or nothing. He was right. She was exhausted that evening, waiting for Richard in the kitchen, the scent of baked apples filling the air. She said, we need to talk. He hung up his coat without a word. I don't love you as I once did, he said flatly. I respect you. I'm thankful. But I can't live like this. It's like being trapped in a windowless box. I want to breathe. He was silent, then reached for her notebook. You're beautiful in here. Real. Was it so bad with me? Empty, she said. Lonely. He sat, gazing out the window. If I said I wanted to start over, would it be too late? She didn't answer. Not because she didn't know, but because her heart had already chosen. 2 days later, she packed a small suitcase, jewelry, books, her favorite coat, and left. Not for George but for herself. The woman she had lost. George arrived that evening. Together they climbed the stairs to her new rented flat on the town's edge. A quiet, wooden house smelling of pine and silence. He helped unpack, then sat beside her bed on the floor. You're brave, he whispered, touching her cheek. She smiled tiredly. I was just tired of living someone else's life. That night they didn't make love. They lay side by side, hands entwined, and for the first time in years she slept peacefully. Weeks later, Richard sent a message. You were right. We are both to blame. If you ever need me, just write. She replied, thank you. I won't forget you, but I'm a different woman now. With George it wasn't a fairy tale. They argued, made up, talked about everyday life. But every time he looked at her like no one had before, she knew she'd made the right choice. Once he asked, what if Richard wants you back? Says he understands now. She smiled. What if yesterday's calendar page was asked to go back? It would be yesterday again. He kissed her hand softly. Life's never straight. 6 months later, George was offered a year-long project in London. She couldn't leave. Her job, her lease, her new rhythm kept her rooted at the station, the train rumbling behind them. They hugged tight. Don't promise, he said, just live. And if you ever see a man on a train looking at you like I did, go to him. If it's not you, then remember me and don't regret. He left. She stayed. With her warm coat, her earrings, and the notebook where the first line read. She woke up and stopped sleeping someone else's life. Full stop. The days that followed felt like walking through a fog with pockets of sharp sunlight piercing the haze. Evelyn settled into her new routine in the small, sunlit cottage on the outskirts of Ashford. The house smelled of polished oak and fresh linens, a far cry from the stale air of the apartment she had left behind. Here, among the wild roses climbing the trellis and the distant hum of the countryside, she was beginning to rediscover herself. Her mornings were slow and deliberate. A cup of Earl Grey brewed while the sun crept through the lace curtains, fingers tracing the delicate patterns of her amber earrings, which caught the light like tiny molten suns. She dressed with care, choosing soft fabrics that brushed her skin gently, silk blouses in muted pastels, pencil skirts that curved elegantly around her hips, and low-heeled shoes that clicked softly on the wooden floors. But despite the quiet comfort of her new life, Evelyn's mind often wandered back to Richard. Their parting was neither bitter nor filled with anger, but the silence between them was like a wound that refused to heal. She had tried to reach out once, sending a brief message to ask how he was, only to receive a cryptic reply. Learning to breathe again. One evening, as the amber glow of sunset spilled into her sitting room, Evelyn found herself staring at her reflection in the tall mirror. Dressed in a dove-gray dress that hugged her silhouette just enough to remind her she was still a woman with desires and dreams, she traced the lines of her face, lines that told stories of laughter, sorrow, and resilience. Her eyes, once dulled by years of neglect, now sparkled with a tentative light. A knock at the door pulled her from her reverie. Standing on the threshold was George, his familiar presence filling the room with warmth. He wore a soft navy sweater and well-worn jeans. His silver-streaked hair tousled in a way that made him look effortlessly handsome. "Thought I'd find you here," he said with a smile that made her heart skip. They settled into the worn leather sofa, sharing a pot of chamomile tea. The conversation flowed easily, as it always did, but tonight there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, a question lingering in the air between them. "Evelyn," George began hesitantly, "have you thought about what comes next? About us?" She sighed, fingers playing with the delicate chain of her necklace. "I don't know. I'm still finding myself. I'm not sure I'm ready for us," he nodded, understanding but disappointed. "I don't want to rush you. I just want you to know I'm here." Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange a promise was made, not of grand declarations or future plans but of patience and presence. The following weeks brought small adventures, picnics by the river, evenings spent exploring antique shops in the town, and quiet moments in the garden where they shared stories and dreams. Evelyn found joy in the simple pleasures, her laughter ringing clear and free. Yet shadows from the past lingered. One afternoon, while browsing through a dusty bookstore, she stumbled upon a photograph tucked inside a forgotten novel. It was a grainy black and white image of a young woman standing by the very river where she had shared ice cream with George. The woman's eyes held a fierce determination, and the inscription on the back read, "To my dearest Alice, may you always find the courage to live fully." Evelyn's breath caught. Alice was her mother's name. But how had this photo ended up here, miles from where her mother had lived? The discovery stirred something deep within her, a mystery she couldn't ignore. That night, as rain pattered against the window panes, Evelyn sat at her desk, the photograph before her. Questions tumbled in her mind like restless waves. Was this a coincidence or a sign? Had her mother harbored secrets in this quiet town? And if so, what truths awaited her beneath the surface of her own carefully rebuilt life? As the clock struck midnight, Evelyn felt the weight of those questions settle around her like a cloak. Somewhere beyond the gentle glow of her lamplight, the shadows of the past whispered, beckoning her toward a journey she hadn't anticipated, and with that, the night held its breath, waiting for the dawn that would bring answers or perhaps deeper mysteries. The morning sun filtered softly through the cream curtains, casting a warm glow across the worn wooden floorboards of Evelyn's cottage. She sat at the kitchen table, the photograph of her mother, Alice, resting gingerly beside a steaming cup of coffee. Her fingers traced the faded edges of the picture as her mind churned with unspoken questions. How did this photo find its way to that dusty bookstore so far from where her mother had lived? Was it a simple coincidence, or a thread pulling her toward something she had long forgotten, or perhaps never known? Determined to find answers, Evelyn dressed with purposeful care. She slipped into a pale blue dress with subtle lace trimming that danced along the neckline, its softness echoing the gentleness she sought within herself. She paired it with simple pearl earrings, an heirloom passed down from her grandmother, and a delicate silver bracelet that tinkled softly with every movement. Her chestnut hair, streaked now with strands of silver, was loosely pinned back, allowing a few curls to frame her face, hinting at a youthful allure that refused to fade. She stepped outside, the crisp autumn air filling her lungs as she made her way toward the town center. The streets of Ashford were alive with the quiet bustle of market stalls, the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with the sharp tang of fallen leaves. The town seemed unchanged, yet Evelyn felt as though she were seeing it through new eyes, eyes that searched for hidden stories beneath familiar facades. Her first stop was the bookstore where she had found the photograph. The bell chimed softly as she pushed open the door, the musky scent of old paper and polished wood wrapping around her like a comforting cloak. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Whitaker, looked up from behind the counter, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of curiosity and warmth. "Back so soon, Miss Evelyn?" he asked with a knowing smile. "Yes, actually. I found a photograph in one of your books. Do you know where it came from?" He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "That old thing? It was part of a donation from a woman who lived here years ago. Alice Bennet." I believed that Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "Do you know anything about her? Her story?" Mr. Whitaker nodded slowly. "Alice was a spirited woman. Lived on the edge of town near the river. She left suddenly one day without much explanation. Folks said she was chasing some dream. Or maybe running from something." Evelyn's mind raced. Running from what? And why had the photograph ended up here, seemingly forgotten? Do you know if she had family? Evelyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not that I know of. She was solitary but not unfriendly. Left behind a few letters, but I never read them. Some things are better left unread. Evelyn thanked him and stepped back into the fading autumn light, the weight of the mystery pressing heavier on her shoulders. Determined to dig deeper, she visited the local archives, a small building tucked behind the town hall. The dusty scent of history greeted her as she sifted through faded newspapers and brittle documents. Hours passed, and just as she was about to give up, a yellowed article caught her eye. Local woman disappears after tragic fire. The article described a fire that had ravaged a cottage near the river, the home of Alice Bennett. She had escaped, but her young daughter had vanished in the flames. The community's outrage and sorrow had been muted. Whispers of secrets and shame threading through the reports. Evelyn's breath caught. The missing daughter, could that have been her? But she had never heard of such a tragedy in her family. Her phone buzzed. A message from George, thinking of you. Hope you're okay. A bittersweet smile tugged at her lips. She typed back swiftly, I'm chasing ghosts. Will tell you soon. That night, Evelyn stood by the window, the photograph of Alice pressed to her chest. The past was no longer a distant shadow. It was a living presence, calling her to uncover its truths. But with every answer came more questions, and the unsettling feeling that some secrets were meant to stay buried. As the wind howled outside, rattling the panes, Evelyn made a silent vow. She would follow this path wherever it led, even if it meant unraveling everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, and the life she was beginning to rebuild. And somewhere, in the darkness beyond her window, a pair of eyes watched silently, waiting, patient, as if guarding a secret that could change everything. The mystery had only just begun. The following morning, Evelyn woke with a restless energy she hadn't felt in years. The mystery of her mother's past had ignited a fire within her. A mix of fear, curiosity, and a longing for truth that refused to be silenced. She dressed carefully, choosing a soft cream blouse that hinted at the curve of her collarbone, paired with tailored navy trousers. Her hair was loosely gathered at the nape of her neck, a few strands rebelliously framing her face. She added a subtle touch of rose lipstick, a quiet declaration of femininity and strength. Outside, the town of Ashford stretched awake beneath a sky brushed with pale blue and gold. The crisp autumn air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Evelyn felt the weight of the past pressing against the present, urging her forward. Her first stop was the town's registry office. Clutching the photograph and a small notebook filled with her own scribbled questions, she stepped inside, greeted by the sterile scent of paper and polished wood. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses, listened patiently as Evelyn explained her search. After a moment, she retrieved a bundle of documents. Alice Bennett's records show she registered a change of address shortly after the fire, she said. She moved to a small village called Renford, about 30 miles north. Evelyn's heart quickened. Renford was a place she had never been, but the name carried an old-world charm that seemed fitting for the secrets she sought. Determined, she arranged to visit the village the next day. That evening, George arrived at the cottage, his presence a balm to her restless soul. He wore a charcoal jacket over a soft sweater, his silver hair catching the lamplight. They sat together by the fire, the warmth softening the edges of the growing mystery. You're chasing shadows, George said gently, reaching for her hand. But maybe those shadows will lead you to the light. Evelyn smiled, squeezing his fingers. I have to know. For me, for her, for whoever I was before all this. The next morning, the sky was a clear, sharp blue as Evelyn set off for Renford, the photograph tucked safely in her bag. The drive was winding, the countryside unfolding in a patchwork of amber fields and dense woods. As she approached the village, the quaint cottages with their thatched roofs and flower boxes seemed untouched by time. She parked near the village square, stepping out into the cool air that carried the scent of pine and distant rain. To the local pub, the Crow's Nest, she asked the bartender, a burly man with a friendly smile, about Alice Bennett. Alice, he said, wiping a glass. Quiet woman. Came here years ago, kept to herself mostly. Tragic story, that fire. Folks still talk about it in hushed tones. Do you know if she had family here? Evelyn pressed. Not that I know. But there's an old woman, Mary, lives at the edge of town. She was Alice's neighbor. Might know more. Thanking him, Evelyn made her way through narrow lanes lined with ancient oaks, until she reached a small cottage draped in ivy. The garden was wild but cared for, roses and lavender mingling with herbs. Mary, a sprightly woman in her 70s with bright eyes and silver hair pulled into a neat bun, welcomed Evelyn with a warm smile. "That I've been expecting you," Mary said, as if she knew more than she let on. They sat in the cozy kitchen, sunlight filtering through lace curtains. Mary spoke of Alice's fierce independence, her passion for painting, and the heartbreak she carried after the fire. "She loved this village," Mary said softly, "but she carried a secret, one she never shared. Something about the night of the fire." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What was it?" Mary hesitated. "There was a man, a stranger. Some say he was there that night. Some say he vanished with her daughter." The words hung heavy in the air. Evelyn felt a chill. Was this stranger connected to her own story? To the life she had just begun to reclaim? As twilight deepened, Evelyn thanked Mary and stepped outside. The village bathed in the soft glow of lanterns. She clutched the photograph tighter, feeling the weight of the past pressing closer. Back in Ashford, George waited, his eyes searching hers as she returned. "I've found more," she whispered. "And it's only the beginning." That night, as the wind whispered through the trees, Evelyn lay awake, the shadows in her mind stirring with secrets yet to be unveiled. The past was no longer a distant memory, it was a living, breathing mystery. And she was determined to uncover every hidden truth, no matter the cost.